Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei becomes the true dragon of Rias Gremory Season 2 Part 1. Before we start, please go support marcusbm2005 for writing that awesome fanfic. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Red Emprese. Gremory Territory. I am Jolina Gladius, the new Red Dragon Empress of this generation, and Issei's future wife Jolina stated as she pointed towards Issei as he stood next to Ria's throne in his human form. He was holding onto the throne for dear life as he could barely contain his embarrassment. It wasn't like him to become so embarrassed, even if a girl he had never met before in his life was saying stuff like this. He had heard many marriage proposals on his travels for the last 10 years, even some before, but those were only from Dragonis that Tiamat and Tannen introduced him to. It was only in those last 10 years that the suitors became a bit more different, so to speak. He had even been offered to marry one of Odin's grandchildren by Odin himself, with said grandchild next to him. Needless to say, Issei found himself feeling a pair of blue eyes on him for most of his stay in Asgard. But this time it was more embarrassing than before. He didn't know why this time was so different from the times before, but it just was. It's not every day some random girl shows up at your home, states that she holds the potential power to kill gods and godlike beings alike, and also claims to be one's future wife. But luckily, she was after all a girl. It's fine, Issei, it's probably just a little girl's old long-held crush, so if you just say no, she will get over it soon enough. Issei thought, hoping that said girl would be mature enough and see how embarrassing she was being, at least to him. I am flattered, Miss Gladius, just call me Jolina, sweetie. Jolina interrupted him, even sending a kiss his way while blushing and smiling like a fool in love. Jolina, but I am sorry to say that I am not seeking a relationship right now, and even more so with one as young as you are. You think little old me looks young? Aren't you a smooth one? I like it. Jolina interrupted again, not even hearing his rejection as she was more focused on flirting. It was getting close to being annoying. Issei just sighed before continuing. I won't be marrying you, Jolina, my apologies. Issei spoke, his voice being a bit more serious, feeling she wouldn't get it unless he did so. Which seemed to work, maybe even a bit too well, as the poor girl began to shake a bit and then slowly nearing the stairs. She raised her head up at him, her eyes were filled with tears, and she almost seemed like she had just lost something important. You can't really mean that. Right, Issei? She asked weakly, as if she was trying to deny the reality she was being faced with. I am sorry, Miss Gladius. I am sure you're a lovely woman, but I am not seeking that sort of relationship currently. Issei said, feeling bad that his words seemed to have such an impact on her. Then he suddenly began to feel a dreadful feeling of loss. He located its source and saw it was her. Jolina was emitting this feeling. He could see it so clearly with his much more enhanced sense of magic, and it sent a shiver down his spine. It was dark and deep, almost like a living void, with her at its center. It seemed like waves of cold dark water as it flowed out in waves, but not over the floor like normal water. No, it went upwards, becoming for each new wave that was sent out. Tiba, Zenobia, Kaneko and Roswiis all felt the feeling as well, and it made them freeze in their seats of fear. Akeno, Rias, Asia and Gasper noticed it too, but were not as affected as the other four, but even so, it still made them scared to move a single inch. But Issei felt it way more clearly thanks to his enhanced senses, and it made him feel a feeling most dragons knew only too well. A call to fight a fellow dragon, to dominate and make them see herself as the stronger of the two. Was this what she wanted to do? Try to dominate him through a show of force? Or through sheer aura alone? Boost. A deep and powerful roar rang out in the hall as the boost gear had been activated. It seemed to be a battle of aura dominance as Jolina used the power of the boost gear to boost her aura. That did it for Issei. His instinct started kicking in, beginning a fight inside of himself to hold control. And while he was dealing with that, he had begun to walk down the stairs that lead up to his sister's throne, passing his family by for each step he took down towards the challenger. On the way down he began letting out his own aura as a way to show he had accepted her challenge. He neared the bottom of the stairs, stopping when he reached them and thereby also standing right in front of her. Only a few inches between their faces, where Issei noticed her former and lively violet eyes had turned dull and blank, like she had turned herself off. But it did not stop her from putting out more of her aura as she and Issei began to reach a point of them being almost evenly matched in the amount of aura they were each releasing. Issei's aura was much like the sun as it started from him and only continued to expand in size and light. While Jolina's was still much like a void or maybe even a black mass, spreading out in water like waves. Then Issei began to let out more, which also caused him to have his crimson horns pop out of the sides of his head, as he normally suppressed his aura so much that he wouldn't have much if any of his dragonic features on him. But right now he felt a need to show her who was on top. No one challenges a dragon on their territory, even if it wasn't really his, and expect to get away with it. Are you done, human? He asked, his voice had become deep and seemed rough, it didn't match his body or face at all. Issei had let out so much aura now that he practically had filled the entire hall with it, and he hadn't even released all of it yet, but he chose not to, unless Jolina would try and continue this fight. But she did as she tried her best to bring out every ounce of her aura, but it didn't matter at this point. She had lost. Issei could see it in her eyes, at least that's what he thought until he noticed the red hue that had begun to form underneath her dull eyes. Is she blushing? Issei wondered. It took him completely by surprise to see her blushing after losing a fight of aura domination. It made him wonder if she was a masochist or if she was just into men who were dominating. Either way, it made him feel slightly uncomfortable and more embarrassed, as there was also the slight chance she was just a huge pervert who got off to this kind of thing. He was so deep in thought wondering why she was reacting this way that he didn't notice her aura slowly disappearing, nor her eyes regaining their former shine. She blinked a few times, then looked at Issei intensely. She then suddenly smiled before she began to lean forward and close her eyes. Issei was brought out of his confused thoughts when he felt something soft touching his lips. It was soft, wet and seemed to try and push and shape his lips in its own image. Then he saw it as his thoughts finally cleared out and let him see the scene before him. He was completely stunned to say the least. Jolina had her eyes closed, was leaning over just a bit and was kissing him. He didn't know how to react to this or if he should react to this. He didn't dislike it, at least he didn't feel like he disliked it. This too led him to have a new wave of thoughts take over and somewhat unable to react. This gave Jolina ample time to taste his lips before leaning back again and opening her eyes again. Her eyes shined with joy as she saw Issei's confused and embarrassed looking eyes look at her. She loved it and chose to lick her lips wanting to see how he would react. When Issei saw her licking her lips, he went into a state of both embarrassment and slight arousal. That was the only word he could think of as he had never felt this feeling before. It was all so new to him in ways that he couldn't decide if they were good or bad, as this was far outside of what he had ever dealt with before. She was like a totally different person compared to the one he had just met before the fight. She had become more daring and seemed less like a girl in love, but more like a young woman seeking it. These new observations from her made Issei feel weird. Not in a bad way, at least it didn't feel bad. He felt an urge to see more of this. And now that he did get a closer look at her, he realized she was a beauty. Even through her weird fashion sense, he could just tell she had a beautiful body. He could tell she seemed to possess rather firm breasts, at least by how they seemed to press against the shirt she was wearing. She could rival Zenobia with them, he just knew it, as that girl was still not very good with understanding common sense and had shown them off without problem before. Those times still haunt him. Her waist too was nice to look at. Was that a thing other people thought about, wondered Issei. Not that it stopped him from spotting her wide hips and now understanding what Akeno, his rather lewd older sister figure, meant when she talked about things called childbirthing hips. Because if those weren't then he didn't know what they were. He felt like she had tried to show off her hips and legs more compared to the rest of her body, as her thighs and legs had been put in a rather set of pants, making him think they could burst open if she just moved her legs enough. Was this also a part of her plan? To make him become aroused by physical appearance alone? If so it had worked, as Issei couldn't stop staring at her. He felt that every part of her must have been made by some goddess of love or else she shouldn't look this good, right? Heck, even her face held a charm to it as she both looked breathtakingly beautiful yet also held a hint of sexual desire, at least in her violet eyes. It perplexed him that such a beauty could have put out so much aura, yet it almost didn't seem like she had trained or worked out a single day in life, yet she still seemed so fit. How? She made him see her as a paradox, as he couldn't comfort her and at the same he still could. If that wasn't bad enough, her feisty and teasing personality seemed to have vanished and be replaced with a new one, again. That was my first kiss. Her voice sounded soft and her breath felt nice on his face. She seemed so innocent, so gentle and sweet, enough to not make him realize he was slowly sucking in his aura and making his family be able to move again. He just kept staring at her, which he noticed she did as well. Was she thinking the same things he was thinking? Did she also find him to be attractive, or was she looking at him with disgust for staring at her? He had never tried this before, it was all so new and confusing. Then something else hit him, her words from earlier. That was her first kiss and his as well. It was my first one. Too. He answered back, a bit nervously. Neither of them said anything after that, they just kept looking at each other. The hall was filled with an awkward silence as neither Issei nor Jolina spoke. The thing that broke the silence was the sound of short breaths and slow footsteps coming closer to Issei, not that he noticed as he was more focused on Jolina. So focused that he even noticed it when Rias grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him away and a bit up the stairs. Jolina's soft smile turned a bit sad, something that Issei saw and felt angry over, but only for a few seconds as his head finally came back and his state of arousal or whatever it was had seamlessly passed. Now he was just left with embarrassment and shame of thinking the things he thought. I don't know who you think you are, Red Dragon Empress, but I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in my territory or against my family. Is that understood? Rias spoke, her more serious side coming out, along with her servants making a half circle around Jolina, a clear demonstration of retaliation from the House of Gremory. Not that Jolina noticed or cared much, her focus was more on Issei, as she watched his eyes which had begun to be filled with what she believed to be an interest in her, but instead began to change back to his eyes before. Jolina kept looking at Issei, feeling sad that she had maybe just had a chance at him, only for it to be taken away from her. Only then did she look at Rias, slight anger visible in her eyes, as she blamed her for ruining her big chance. She wanted to attack them and try to convince Issei to give her a chance. But she could see that these people cared a lot about Issei, and vice versa. She would have to back down for the time being and try to get on Issei's good side, but not right now. Fine, Duchess Gremory, I'll back down for today. But I'll be back, Issei dear, but do come find me in the meantime, Jolina said in joyous tone as she watched Issei cheeks become a bit red by her word. She turned around and began to walk out of the hall, unsummoning the boosted gear as she went. Rias and her peerage could feel she was powerful, really powerful. Of all the people in this house and territory, only Issei could take her on and win, no one else would stand a chance against a monster like her. At least that's what Rias and the others were thinking, but Issei was left in a weird state. He was confused, embarrassed and maybe even still aroused. But even more weirdly, at least for him, he didn't want her to go, not yet at least. Just who are you, Jolina Gladius? He wondered as the doors closed behind her. I'm Skip, Familiar Forest. The Familiar Forest, a dimension of its own with no link to any other, outside of the dimensional cap which connects it to every world, but only if one knows how to navigate their way to it. Though most just use the shining guidance of a full moon to grant their teleportation circle with a safe path to its destination. It was one such night where the moon had led a new and young promising peerage king and his servants to the land of familiars. Speaking of kings, one thing not many outsiders knew was that the Familiar Forest had its own king, or queen. Though most people didn't know them as the king or queen of the Familiar Forest, as said being who would be the current monarch was normally already famous in the outside world. So therefore, when people thought of the current ruler of the Familiar Forest, they would think of Issei, even if they didn't know that he was the ruler of this place. So then one might wonder, what does a king of familiars do? They don't do shit. Besides overseeing certain problems the familiars' masters can't handle themselves, as well as allowing any new familiar master to live in their forest. So his title and role was mostly ceremonial, as fights rarely broke out as most beings had already made pecking orders, with Issei being on top and then so on and so forth. But he still had to spend the better half of every year in this place, or else his claim as its ruler and de facto owner would be passed on to another, being who was strong enough to carry the title. So then what does Issei do with his time when stays to ensure his claim? Well, he reads books, talks to old, even sometimes ancient familiars. Not that was something he would recommend, as some of them could be rather tricky and mischief at times. Some even spend their time in other parts of both the supernatural and normal world, just messing with people or the like. Issei even had to at one point drag some of those guys back home, as they had begun to or were rather close to revealing the supernatural to the humans. But for this day he wasn't just sitting on top of mountains or grassy plains and reading to pass the time. No, he was visiting his mother's grave seeking guidance to a problem he was having within himself. One he hadn't been able to tell his sisters or brother about, nor his adoptive parents. He had been walking around in circles back in his room in the main Gremory manor as he couldn't stop thinking and trying to understand this one single problem. Said probleming being what he had experienced when he first met Jolina Gladius only less than a week ago. Her power, the kiss and her confusion. Each one being a smaller problem unto itself, but for Issei they were all part of the same problem. And the problem was his unknown feelings for them, or rather her, Jolina. He didn't know what love is, or rather the feeling of love one has for someone that is based on attraction, romance and desire for another. He had never felt this kind of love before and didn't know or at least wasn't sure if this is what he was feeling. And this problem had led to other problems, such as him being unable to get her out of his head. Thinking about her almost every waking hour, blushing when he remembers her and his kiss, and when he remembers his lewd thoughts about her body. It also led him to feel disgusted as a result of those thoughts, even pathetic at times as why couldn't he, the literal heavenly dragon of the sun, couldn't determine if he was in love or not. But would that make it better if he knew which it was? On one hand, he would be happy to know how he felt, who wouldn't? But on the other side, if he knew then wouldn't he have to act on those feelings? And that his current state of mind was in a constant flux as he tried to understand the self-made paradox he had put himself into and tried to fix alone. Mostly alone. As he had been here for his weekly stay for the last 2 days, in which he delayed his visit to his mother grave for the last 2 days, so at the dawn of the third day with a rather deep yawn, he rose from his cave and moved outside to be met with the light of the familiar forest sun. One thing he never really liked with the supernatural world, at least the ones devils were in the most, was the weird coloring of the suns. It had only been since he had first seen the human world that he truly understood this old dislike of them. Who would want to live under a purple, orange or even a green sun when one could live under a yellow or almost golden sun instead? But that was not something he would let himself think about for too long. He had something more important to do. Then he thought about which colors match the sun best. But gold is definitely and obviously the best. Issei thought as he inwardly smirked at winning his own childish game of which color is better. He began his walk from his home to his mother's grave, passing over the lands he had, with his then flames of almost everlasting decay, had burnt to make his home. Then he had been put up on a hunting board of sorts by the familiar masters back then, which led to him being beaten the shit out of by his now older sister Kaneko and her new wife, Nin Haji. Along with the rest of her peerage. He had a lot of respect for his older siblings because even if he is the third strongest being in existence now officially, that wouldn't stop his siblings from beating him when he made mistakes. It was love, as they said, but they weren't the ones who ended up hurt afterwards. Then again, if he did fight back he could maybe without meaning to, kill them in a single shot. He was very strong and very young, he hadn't fully learned to control his strength. So the only thing he could really fight with was his aura, but that was something his sisters, rather childishly, banned him from doing, as he would always win. Only his older brother Surziches would let him do it, as at least Surziches could both take it and had even won at times. He passed by many different nests of shorter-lived and more family-focused familiars as he went down one of the natural-made paths in the forest. They would greet him with unspoken words and bow as a sign of their respect. He could even see some, teaching their youngs that of all the beings in this world, he was one they respect and be loyal to. He even passed by older or more dangerous familiars, who also showed respect by bowing, as for most of them power was the only thing needed to have, to earn their respect. Such beings would be direwolves, greater snakes, lesser dragon races, semi-divine beasts, animal children of legendary beings and even some fairies. He enjoyed the attention, as it only served to boost his ego, but he also didn't always feel he deserved it. He was after all much younger than some of the beings who were bowing to him. But today he didn't let it get to him as much as he normally would, as his head was already filled with enough thoughts than he could right now handle. Not that it would stop a rather annoying, yet still friendly enough, fallen angel Tarzael from landing on the path Issei was walking down, somewhat blocking his path. Great king of the familiar forest, I, Tarzael, last son of Lilith, challenge you to a duel, the young man declared as he basked with his jet black feathery wings, making his long blonde hair swing in the wind he made with his wings. Issei just sighed as he already knew this would happen. It was almost like his own personal time of the month type of thing. He didn't enjoy it very much, but knew he had to go through it. Look Tarzael, I am not in the mood right now, so can you just buck off? I'll fight you later, okay? Issei said as he, without a care of Tarzael's safety, began to walk right over him. Tarzael, upon seeing Issei's clawed feet approaching him with no intention of stopping, flew out of the way with much trouble. Despite his heritage and his fit looks, he was a complete wet rag and the weakest fallen angel in history. Another thing that keeps Issei's mind busy as he wonders how a son of Lilith can be so weak and also a fallen angel instead of a devil or monster. Wise king, I can see you seem to be in a hurry today, so I won't take much of your time today, Tarzael yelled as he flapped his wings as much as he could and whined for every flap. I office's endless boredom. Fine, what is it, Tarzael? Issei slowed down a bit for Tarzael as he semi-crashed on top of Issei's head. Issei would have kicked him off, but knowing the kid might die if he did and he didn't want Lilith after him, he held back. For now. Hoo-ha. Great wise king. A rumor has spreaded. Regarding you. Tarzael stopped as he tried to get air, while Issei just rolled his eyes as this was nothing new to him. As every time Tarzael came and challenged him, he would normally end up telling him about this month's new rumor or some dumb title he had been given. One such title that he really disliked was his title as the gatekeeping dragon. Why was he called this? Because to some glory-seeking beings, gods and brave heroes, or just idiots, saw him as the one being who stood in the way of them fighting the dragon gods. He got where the title came from and was sure Drake and Albion had been called something similar, as he is the first dragon in a long time who has been given the seat or title of third strongest being in the supernatural world. So some people would see him as a stepping stone to test their strength and see if they could fight and win against one of the dragon gods. But life isn't an RPG game like the ones humans love so much, and for some reason different parts of the supernatural world have become almost addicted to. It's not like Officer Great Red would come and fight someone if they managed to beat Issei, also it was unlikely anyone could, at least in this age of peace. But back to the rumor, Issei wondered for a bit what they might be calling him now. So what do they call me now? Issei asked, only to receive a confused face from Tarzale before he laughed softly and stood straight. No, nothing like that, wise king. The rumors speak of your new mate, the new red dragon Emprese. She's not my mate, Issei roared out in embarrassment. An awkward silence ensued as Tarzale stood frozen by fear and the nearby familiars and that peerage which just happened to be on the other side of some bushes watching the two talking. All of them froze in fright, some just by shock at how loud Issei's voice could be. Issei, upon noticing the lack of all sound, coughed a single time, managing to bring back sound as some beings got the message and went back to business. Not a peerage of devils, they just decided to keep hiding as none of them had ever seen a dragon, so they just couldn't let a chance like this pass by them. She is not my mate, Tarzale. She is just a young girl in love and who has now decided she wants to spread lies. Oh, by Great Red's peaceful dream, Issei complained as he could already feel a headache forming and it was still morning. Tarzale just smiled awkwardly before speaking. Ah, I see. I never really believed the rumor myself, I just wanted to inform you that it was being spread around. Tarzale said as he bowed, not wanting to show how scared he was right now. That's the last son of Lilith for ya, weak, not even the right species and also a wimp. Good, at least some of you crows aren't all gossipy about everything you hear. If only they were more of your kind, just less weak and maybe even take a punch too. Issei sighed as he began to walk forward again, leaving a folk of about 7 devils to stand and look on in awe as they had just seen a dragon and the newly named heavenly dragon at that. That was so cool, did you guys see how big he was? I mean, I heard about him on DR and all, but I never before Issei could hear any more of newfound fans praising words they were already out of earshot for him. It seems you were happy with praise, wise king. Tarzale spoke, but not from on top of his head, but instead to his side as he tried with much trouble to fly besides him. Yeah, I guess so. Besides, it's nice to hear nice things about myself, especially when doing things like I am about to do. Issei spoke as his eyes seemed to narrow a bit, something Tarzale had seen before and knew the meaning behind. Ah. I see. Well, I shall take my leave. Oh dear mother, this is so hard. Bye for now. Wise King Tarzale spoke as tried to land only to crash from exhaustion. Bye, my feathered friend, until next time. Spoke as he reached a more rocky part of the familiar forest. It hadn't always been so rocky or destroyed either, since a lot of old tree trunks lay scattered around the area. This place used to have a mountain and was said to house the former queen of this place, Tiamat the Karma Chaos Dragon King and mother of Issei. He had, a long time ago, almost over 100 years now, destroyed the mountain when he had learned about his past life and unlocked a power which no one thought possible. The forgotten Juggernaut Drive, one of the few gifts Issei Haidu took with him when he reincarnated into Issei. Though that was a long time ago and now Issei is the only Issei inside of him. He reached the would-be entrance to his old childhood home, now turned gravestone, as were a hole big enough for Issei, in his dragon form, to go through once was. Now a stone as big as him stood, on which he had carved old letters of Old Dragonic. It didn't have much text, even if some of the words were long, but that was just how Old Dragonic was written, and also why only dragons can read it. As some say, at least old scholars. It's as hard to learn as its creators are to fight. Though Issei never really cared much for that part, only that no one, other than dragons, would be able to read it. In front of the gravestone was a small dirt hill, and underneath it laid the body of Tiamat. She died a little over 20 years ago now. She had chosen that she would die in her human form, and so in the last few months of her life, she would stay in her human form every hour of the day and night. Until she passed on. Hello mother. It's been a while, hasn't it? Sorry, I was just so busy, but now I am here, so. Let's talk like old times, right mother? Issei spoke as he turned into his human form, took out a red gem and placed it on her grave. I've missed you, mother. Human world, Denmark, in a small town on the coastline of Jylland, with wide and open beaches, with the sand as wide as the inhabitants who lived there. With its grassy spiky-like hills, also called dunes, where the winds of the North Sea would blow at, only to be pushed over and above the towns and plains behind them, not disturbing the people there. On one such beach a young woman stood, her long blue hair swaying in the rather cold winds, as November was about to end and make way for December. She had been there for a few hours, just watching the waves crash onto themselves and the beach shores, even a few of the old German bunkers that still hadn't crumbled under the weight of time. She found slight comfort just standing there, as not only was the view great, despite the cold winds. But it also lets her see the most beautiful thing in the world for her. The sun. She would look at it every day after training, but not just because of its shining light, but because of who it represented and vice versa. Issei, a person she had a crush on for the longest time. He was her one true love. It was a silly thing to wish for such a powerful being, to find her a mere human whose greatest worth is only her title as Red Dragon Emprese, to be able to love her. She felt childish dreaming of this future of her and him being together, but it was a nice dream, and one not so easily crushable as others as she knew it was her destiny. She just knew it, she had always known it was to be, that someone out there was meant to be hers and hers alone. Something Drake hadn't really helped, as he only made her believe in it even more. And as such she found herself standing on the beach each and every day after training, since he had rejected her. She would just look at the ocean and the golden orb that floated right above it. And then she would just think and think and think even more. Think about how to get on his good side, on how to make his family accept her, and how to maybe make him reach out to her. She was still stuck on the first two, but she had managed to set in motion the third one, as she had started a rumor. The rumor was just the truth to her, even if it wasn't acutely true, but who can deny one's desire to live in one's own perfect world? She had told some fallen angel she met a few days back that someone named Jolina Gladius had become the new mate of Issei, the heavenly dragon of sunlight. They ate it up, and before long it was halfway around the supernatural world. She couldn't deny she felt a bit bad for spreading a rumor about Issei, as she already knew he was not very liked by some people in the supernatural community, plus she had just spread more things for those people to badmouth him with. Not that she was just going to let them get away with that. So when she and him were official together, she would deal with those people with him by her side. How romantic, oh I just can't wait for that to come. Oh my sweet Issei. She said out loud in joy, but her eyes didn't match the tone and voice. They looked dull, much like back in Gremory Throne Hall. She suddenly fell to her knees with a bump, her hair swinging wildly as she fell. She hung her head low, as feelings of guilt started to appear in her mind. Her hair wiping her face softly, not that she noticed as suddenly felt so much unknown guilt and anguish all at once. Drake quickly woke up as he felt her sudden wave of negative emotions. Jolina, what's wrong? What happened? Drake called out in her mind, his voice filled with worry for his hostess. He had only seen her act this way once before, in all the time he had spent with her, this was the second time she was overcome with sudden guilt and anguish. Last time ended well enough, but if this was happening a second time, then he wasn't sure he would be so lucky again. He tried to read her memories, to see if he could find an explanation for her sudden state. But he couldn't see anything that should have been able to affect her current state. Jolina, please talk to me, I know you're still here, don't let whatever this is get to you, Drake called out again, this time earning himself a reaction as she seemed to speak. Drake. What's happening to me? Her voice sounded so joyless and so rough, like she had been crying for hours or something. I don't know Jolina, but it seems to be like last time, when you went into the Juggernaut Drive. Don't worry, I won't let that happen again, so you just have to calm down. Drake instructed as best he could, as he could hear the past host beginning the chant. He felt like it was only a matter of time before she would go berserk, unless he could somehow make her calm down again. I don't want to go through that again. Drake, please help me, Jolina cried out, as she could feel herself starting to panic. I will help you, don't worry Jolina, I will get you out of. Suddenly Drake's voice was cut off. Then Jolina opened her eyes expecting to see herself sitting on the sand, but instead she was still standing up, like none of that had happened. She looked around her, expecting that maybe someone interfered with her mind or cast some illusion spell on her. What the hell is happening right now? Drake, you there? Jolina mentally asked, as she went into a fighting stance, ready for any sudden attacker to appear. Yes, I am here Jolina. What is the problem? Drake asked in a slightly worried tone, confusing Jolina as she was sure Drake had experienced that too. Didn't you feel it too? Didn't you see it? She asked worriedly, as this time it was Drake's turn to be confused, as he didn't understand what she was talking about. I'm sorry Jolina, but could you explain what it is I was supposed to feel or see? Drake asked, making Jolina even more confused as to how he didn't know what had just happened. What just happened? What was Jolina talking about? She couldn't remember. I don't know. I just felt like something happened. Maybe I should just go to bed earlier. I must be tired or something. Sorry Drake, false alarm. Jolina finished, earning herself a concerned goodnight from Drake before he went back to sleep again. She turned around and started walking off the beach and up to one of the passages in the dunes. And as she went along the path, which steadily became more and more populated and more stable, she saw an old grandma and a little girl going out of a clothes store. Thanks for the pretty blue dress Granny, I love you, the girl smiled as she held her grandma's hand and walked home. It made Jolina stop and watch them both. The little girl and the grandma reminded her so much of her own grandmother. She smiled a bit sadly as she remembered her own grandmother. She was a sweet old woman who had practically raised her as Jolina's parents were always fighting over every little thing, so much to the point that it had led her grandmother becoming bedridden as she couldn't stand to see her daughter and the man her daughter loved fighting and leaving Jolina all to herself. And so while her uncle, aunt and grandpa would take her out to see things and play, her grandmother would tell her stories and play with her to the best of her ability. She remembered one such story, as it was what sparked her love for Issei, and was also the last one she ever got to tell her. She didn't know why, but she decided to walk back to the beach again, wanting to stay there for a bit longer. She didn't know why, she just felt she had to, like something big was going to happen if she stayed there. And so while she stood on the beach again, she began to think back to that story her grandmother had told her before she passed in her sleep the next day. Flashback, 21 years ago, Denmark, in an old farmhouse, out on an island called Bornholm, sat two people. One a young girl, who sat on her old grandmother's bedside. The old grandmother had been bedridden for months now, the doctors and the rest of the family knew it was only a matter of time before she would pass on. But even so, old Jolina still held the spirit of a young woman in her, she was never going to admit she was old, never. "Oh my dear little Jolina, my how that new dress suits you, did your parents give it to you?" Jolina asked, referring to Jolina's new crimson dress she had gotten when she and her grandfather had gone into Nexos. "No. Me and Grandpa Olive were the only ones who went. Mama and Papa stayed home. They had another fight," Jolina admitted as she clenched the end of her dress. She hated it when her parents fought, as she could almost never escape being caught in the middle. Emina sighed deeply, slightly angered at her daughter and son-in-law's actions, but what could she do? She was too weak to even walk by herself, not even to mention discussing and finding a solution to Jolina's problems. "I see, it must be hard, dear. But don't worry, me and Grandpa will take care of it. For now let me tell you a story from when I was your age. Would you like that?" Emina asked, making the sad pout on Jolina vanish and turn into a smile of joy. She loved her grandmother's stories, even if they were a bit weird. Emina sat herself up, with much struggling and heavy breathing, but managed to do it after a minute or two. "When I was a little girl, only a year or two older than you, I found myself in a magical forest full of animals I have never seen before, nor since." Jemina began, as her voice rang with the sound of young joy at telling this old memory. Elena was infatuated right then and there, wishing to know more of this forest and its strange animals. "I had just been walking around near the old light tower when I happened to find a little bird. It had such beautiful feathers and the softest looking beak I had ever seen. It looked nothing like the others from around here. I then noticed it was hurt, so I did what I only thought was right and went to pick it up and take it home to save it." Emina spoke as she made small wing flaps with her hands, with much struggle. "But it made Jolina smile, so it was worth it. But when I tried to pick it up, it began to light up in a bright green color, and before I knew it, I was no longer standing next to the old lighthouse. I was in a forest unlike any I had ever seen before. The trees looked dead, with their dark brown arms and purple leaves, but the ground looked much healthier as it had an almost glowing green color to it." Elena gasped at the details, finding it so unbelievable it made her giggle, out of what Jemina could only describe as pure joy and fun. "But it was true, my dear, and as I wondered where I had been taken to, I saw a man who looked much like the bird I had tried to pick up. He was as tall as your father, but a bit more handsome. And had long green hair and powerful red eyes. He reached his hand out to me, asking me to follow him so that he could thank me for bringing him home." Elena awed her grandmother's bravery to follow a stranger, something she had been told never to do. Not that Jemina was trying to tell her she should, as when it happened she was rather scared, but it was all she could do at the time. "So I followed him into the forest, seeing all sorts of creatures, and began to forget I was in an unknown place, because the more I looked and saw, the more I felt disappointed about my own world. It was so dull compared to this one." Emina stopped for a second as she saw Jolina's bright smile and her eyes shining with excitement to hear more. "I kept walking with the birdman until he let go of my hand and told me to keep going down a path that had been carved into the forest. It looked so creepy, dark and scary, but he assured me that I would be able to go home if only I followed this path, as it would lead me to the queen and prince of the familiar forest, as he called it." Emina explained, not wanting to spoil the race of the queen or prince yet for Jolina, who was sure that they would be birds as well. "So I kept walking and walking and walking until I saw pillars of hard rock and stone going into the sky like they used to be one single pillar. I became excited to meet them, and so I began to run down the path, wanting to meet these two beings. But when I got there, I felt so afraid as what I saw was." Jemina held a dramatic pause to keep Jolina as excited as possible. "I saw two dragons, one blue like your hair and one red like my blanket. They sat on two giant slabs of rock and were talking about something before the red one noticed me and a bit after the blue one did as well." Jolina became physically scared, thinking her grandmother was in trouble, only to make the old lady inwardly smirk. "They asked me to step closer so that they could see me clearly, which I did. So when I stopped, I stood right in front of the blue one, the queen of the familiar forest. She introduced herself as Tiamat and her son as Issei, then asked me for my name. I said I was Jolina Gladius and that I was brought here when I tried to help a green bird who turned out to be a green-haired man. Jolina explained as she remembered how scared she was, as anyone would be in the presence of a real dragon. Jolina, without noticing, clenched her grandmother's red blanket, feeling fearful for her grandmother, as if it was happening right now and not many years ago. They thanked me for bringing him back home and that I showed kindness to a stranger. Then after the red dragon, the son Issei asked me if I wished to return home. I thought it over, thinking with the mind of an 8-year-old that I could do whatever I wanted. And so I asked to stay in the forest. Jolina said, making Jolina's eyes beam with curiosity at her grandmother's choice. Though said curiosity vanished when she saw the small hint of guilt in her grandmother's violet eyes, like she regretted her choice back then. I spent 2 years of my life there, living amongst the familiars and being taken care of by the green-haired man and sometimes even teammate and Issei. But at one point I began to miss my home, my family and my own grandmother. Jolina sniffed a bit, remembering it. So I asked to be taken back home by Issei, he accepted and flew me back home. But when I returned Never mind that dear, as my life afterwards changed very much, as I had learned a bit of magic, enough to talk with the people who had taken care of me there, which I did for a long time until I grew older and thought it was merely a game I had invented as a child. Jolina's voice became sad, remembering what had awaited her when she came home after 2 long years. Her grandmother had died, believing her only grandchild had been killed. Then I met your grandpa Olive and had a family with him. When your uncle was born, I received some strange visitors, stating that they knew me as a child. An old woman, a young man and a bird came to visit me. I couldn't believe it when I saw them, as I immediately recognized them despite them being in different forms. Jolina said, remembering her joy at finding out that old childhood dream was not just a dream, it had happened. And so, every year on the day your Uncle Henrik was born, I meet them again and we talk about the old days. I hope I can bring you with me this time, wouldn't that be great? Then you could meet Issei, he is really sweet and very friendly, especially towards sweet little girls like you, Jolina. Jolina finished her story on a happy note as she could see the pure excitement from Jolina at the thought of meeting real magical beings. Sadly she never got to, as the next morning she woke to a silent and joyless house, as her grandmother had passed on in her sleep. She unlocked the boost gear not long after and made a vow that she would one day meet her grandmother's old friends and that she would meet Issei. Flashback end, present time. Needless to say, Jolina smiled sadly remembering her grandmother's story, knowing it was true and that she had met Issei, now she just had to make him love her as well, the same way she does. Though through this trip back to her past memories, she had failed to notice the recently arrived Issei, standing on her left side with a few meters between them. He had stood there now for an ungodly long minute or two, waiting for Jolina to register his presence. She hadn't as she was still far too deep in her thoughts, so Issei decided to step in and take the first step in this soon-to-be awkward conversation. Miss Gladius. Could we talk, if you're not busy? Issei asked, trying to be as polite as possible as he could, after all he did reject her, and now here he was seeking her. So he should maybe try to act a bit nicer, or else he might hurt her, if she even could get hurt. Because as soon as she heard his voice, she had turned fully towards him, with a smile beaming with joy just at the sight of him. She then realized he asked if she wanted to talk, blushing a bit as she had been a bit more focused on seeing if it was him or not. You want to talk? Sure, I'd love to talk, Issei noticed it again, her sudden change in both tone and facial expressions. She had started off a bit surprised, then changed to a more flirtatious tone at the flip of a coin, or maybe just by seeing him. He gulped, already feeling nervous by her sudden shift. Yes, well you see I wanted to see if you were okay, since you seemed very angry or you know. Issei really struggled to speak as he felt her eyes piece him. Oh that? Oh don't worry Issei dear, I was just a bit stunned by your rejection as I had hoped you would see me as your perfect choice for a mate. Jolina spoke, again saying his name in a more flirtatious way as she began to walk closer to him. She only stopped when there was only about half a meter between them, making them able to see each a bit better as the sun was beginning to set. Ah. Yeah, about that yes. Have you realized that I am the perfect person for you now? Jolina just interrupted and again with a whole new tone and personality. No, not exactly. I came because of that rumor you have been spreading around. Issei said, still feeling pretty nervous as he couldn't predict what kind of person he would be talking to, then getting an answer from. Well, Issei I just thought it would be a good idea to let other people know that you have potential strong mate like me plus make sure no one tries to steal you away what? Nothing. Jolina explained, as it was basically true at least to her, not so much for Issei. Issei just sighed heavily as he tried to process what he had just heard before opening his mouth again. I see. Well, I can't really stop you from just simply declaring your interest in me. But Issei's face suddenly went up in flames as both his golden eyes and hair went ablaze. I will not tolerate lies about my own personal life. Is that understood? Issei spoke harshly, as he hated, like really hate rumors that were about his private life, something he felt in recent years he had less of, thanks to half of every faction in the world wanting to know what he does at all times. Jolina gulped, feeling his rage, and it made her feel a bit guilty, as she had lied about a very powerful and very important being. She bowed deeply, before speaking again. I am sorry, Issei. I just got a bit ahead of myself. I hope you can forgive. She just stopped talking suddenly. It made Issei feel nervous, thinking he had scared her too much with his words. Miss Gladius, are you alright? He asked, as he put his left hand on her right shoulder. She didn't react, so he tried to shake her and still nothing. Jolina, what's wrong? Please talk to me. I am sorry if I went too. He then felt a wave of negative emotions wash over her. His eyes widened as he had seen this once before, back when he first met her. After she rejected her proposal, she became still before she lashed out. Why does this keep happening to you? Wait, Drake, are you there? Issei called out as he kept trying to also make Jolina react or maybe snap out of her current state. There was a bright green light, then when it vanished the boosted gear had appeared on her left. What is it? What's with her? What happened to her? Issei. Drake spoke, as his voice went from worried about his host to being confused after seeing his old host standing right in front of his new host. Not right now, Drake, I need your help to find out what happened to her. Issei said, as he had an idea of how surprised Drake was to see a near-perfect copy of his past host. Right, let me see. What's with all these negative emotions? Where did they all come from? Drake said out loud in confusion, as he hadn't seen anything like this since she went into the Juggernaut drive. I don't know, we were just talking, and then she suddenly went quiet, and then after this wave of negative emotions came. Can you do something to help her? Issei asked, genuine concern evident in his voice as he felt he might be the cause of this problem, as she also became like this last time when he first met her, after something he had said. I don't think I can do much in the current situation, as I need to keep the past host back, or else they might make her do something she will regret. You'll have to enter her mind, somehow. Drake explained, making Issei confused as to how he was supposed to archive something like that. I know it might seem or sound impossible, but for all intents and purposes you're still one of my hosts, as when Issei Haidu died he had so much power left that he was cast out of the boost gear and reincarnated as a sort of copy of me. You're that copy, you're still my host, Drake explained as Issei felt his mind explode as he tried to understand what he was being told. Then something even weirder, at least to him, happened as seemingly out of nowhere knew what to do. I don't understand what you mean by me being your host, but I think I know how to help her now. Issei said as he stepped back a bit. He closed his eyes and began to take a few deep breaths before he began to shine in a golden light. When he opened his eyes again, it wasn't the golden fire, it was a crimson one, and said fire began to spread to the rest of his body. His golden features turned crimson and burst out into flames of the same crimson color. His wings, horns and tail appeared as he was trying his best to achieve this thing he somehow knew would help her. Drake could feel himself tremble a bit by the side of Issei as he began to float while still being in flames, and his wings spread like a dragonic angel. Issei, the heavenly dragon of sunlight. The one who achieved what only gods could. The one who took the sun's light and put it in his eyes before making it his own light shall offer you Jolina Gladius said light and guide you to a better tomorrow. He reached out with his now clawed hand, placing it on top of her head. The light began to shine from the two's contact, shining brightly as Issei began to feel an intense pain going through his body, more than anything he had ever felt before. I hear art out in pain as the pain began to slowly increase, and with it came images and memories. He began to see all of her memories, her life, her dreams, her emotions and her hidden trauma. It wasn't long after that the light died out and Drake could feel Jolina had become stable again as she wasn't feeling waves upon waves of negative emotions anymore. But Issei hadn't taken too well to this whole thing because as soon as Jolina began to open her eyes and register things, she saw Issei smiling at her. He was happy that he could help, but it only lasted for a few seconds before he fell over and fainted in the sand. Issei? Issei. Jolina cried as she rushed over to his side, not caring about his current appearance or the fact that smoke was coming off him. Issei, talk to me, Issei, she kept calling to him, shaking him hoping he would respond. But he didn't after a few more seconds of her relentless shaking, so with a bit of help from Drake, she managed to teleport herself and him to her house. She placed him in her bed, then stood by the side of the bed for a bit blushing, before she began to strip down, and then took his clothes off as well. I hope this works for Issei's sake. She said, as she went under the blanks with him, hugged him tightly into her before she drifted off to sleep. Chapter 2. Uneven Lie. Denmark, Jolina's house. How did I get here? Better question, why is she here? Issei thought somewhat sarcastically while also being worried as he stared nervously, with his golden eyes, at the sleeping beauty that was Jolina, who was snuggled up against him under both a blanket and his wing. How she had done this was still a mystery to Issei, as all he remembered from last night was meeting her and then her suddenly becoming still and then boom, now he was here. Even worse yet, he felt sore all over and could only wonder what she had done to him. So behind his sarcastic thoughts was a very embarrassed and confused Issei, who was just trying to not think about the fact a really cute girl was lying up against him, naked and holding onto him tightly. He had woken up only a few minutes ago, as the first few rays of sunlight had begun to appear, and since he was placed directly under the window, he was stirred from his sleep in a rather annoying way, though some might say it was more natural that way. An. Yes, it's a bad joke, bite me. And so for those last few minutes, Issei had been in a, so far, very well hidden inner panic over his current predicament. He didn't want to just run for his clothes, which had been nicely put on a nearby chair at the end of the bed, since he felt it would be rude to Jolina, who he assumed had brought him here last night after some sort of accident he had or that she might have caused him from her sudden stillness from last night. He didn't know, but he intended to find out. And on the other side, he felt rather comfortable in his current position, as it wasn't every day a guy his size could find himself sleeping with a woman taller than him. He felt like he could just lay into her with how big she was. She has to be at least 6.2 feet. Right. Issei felt his own height lacking compared to hers, even though he was 6.1 feet on a good day. He could only imagine how it had looked to the others when he stood up to her back in the throne room. He found himself blushing over the size difference and also wondering how dense his family was to not see her kissing him back then. It should have been rather obvious. He then felt her arms begin to tighten around him as his body was pressed against her own. Oh, by great Red's great dreams, why is she so soft? Issei wondered before feeling a pair of eyes looking at him. He knew there was only one person in this room right now, so his choices were rather limited, so when he opened his eyes again he was met with Jolina's violet ones. Good morning, Issei. Did you sleep well? Jolina tried to sound flirtatious, but it didn't go so well as she was blushing so much, it made her look like a tomato. Not that Issei was any better, and why would he be? Him and her were only inches from each other's faces, with their bodies practically wrapped in each other's. But to keep himself from looking like the nervous wreck he was, he answered back. I slept well. How about you, Miss Gladius? He asked with much trouble, even feeling a bit more nervous when Jolina pouted a bit when he had called her Miss Gladius. With her pouting only being a way for her to not blush as much and look like a nervous wreck like Issei, Jolina felt she had to show off or maybe tease him a bit. So with almost no thought or planning, she pressed him closer to her, smiling with all the confidence of a child who had just done something so daring. But said confidence vanished when she saw Issei, looking a bit more nervous than before, and then she felt it. Her pout and even her up-and-coming confident smirk vanished and were instead replaced with a blush so red it might as well be a whole new shade of red. They both pushed each other off themselves as they each tried to hide their naked bodies from the other, with Issei having to use his wings as cover since Jolina took the blanket. For a few seconds they each just looked at each other, their blushes not fading and only becoming newer and newer shades of red. It was until Issei took a deep breath before he tried to speak again, despite his inner panic. I am sorry for my rude actions, but I am a man and I can't stop my body from acting in these kinds of ways when such a beautiful woman, such as you, is so close. I am sorry. Jolina had expected to see, as the first thing in the morning, that the almost famously prideful heavenly dragon Issei was bowing apologetically to her for being aroused by her body and beauty. Her blush only became more red as she hid even further under her blanket and whispered back. It's fine. I think you're pretty handsome too. This would be the start of a very awkward morning between the new red dragon Emprese and Issei, the heavenly dragon of sunlight. Though luckily for the two, Drake would wake up soon enough. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Gremory Manor, has anyone seen Issei? He was supposed to come home last night. Rias asked as she stepped into the main dining hall for the Gremory family, where her father, mother, nephew, Grafia and niece were all gathered. Good morning to you as well, sweetie. No, we haven't seen your little brother, and you sure he hasn't sent you a message about a prolonged stay? Then Alana, the mother of Rias, asked as she smiled friendly at her daughter. Rias sighed a bit as she sat down in her chair at the end of the table and got her breakfast. Sorry mother, I was just worried, it isn't like him to just suddenly disappear somewhere. Rias complained as she took in a big bite, not caring about how unladylike she was acting, as she was more worried about Issei, since he had been acting really strange since Jolina had left. Maybe he found himself a friend on his travels and is staying with them. Zeoticus, the former head, said as he took a sip of morning tea while looking at his newspaper. Rias doubted that, didn't really make friends anymore, even though he seemed so open. He was rather picky when it came to friends, so she found it very unlikely. I don't think Ziotica suddenly spit out his tea, staining the rather nice and new tablecloth that Venelana had just bought. Father, are you okay? Rias asked, worried he was sick or something, though he just began to laugh loudly, not even noticing the death stare he was getting from his wife, as she was really annoyed about him running the tablecloth. I think I found out why, or rather, who is behind your brother being late. Ziotica said while smirking devilishly, as he thought to himself. Finally, more grandkids. Well, who is it, dear, who is keeping our little boy company then? Venelana asked, as she threatened him to answer, with the way she said dear, it sent shivers up the older devil's spines. Ziotica struggled nervously, before showing the front picture of the newspaper. It's this girl right here, Jolina Gladius, the new red dragon Emprese. What? Rias interrupted her father, making everyone in the room look at her, wondering why she suddenly yelled. Auntie Rias, have you met her, this Jolina Gladius? Milikas asked, receiving a nod in return from Rias as she began to blush, realizing how unladylike she was being. Yes, me, Issei and my peerage met her the other day. She and Issei were behind the sudden outburst of aura, as Issei was trying to stop her from. Wait, where was that picture taken and by who? Rias finally got a good look at the picture, as well as the headline. Red Dragon Emprese, Jolina Gladius, takes Heavenly Dragon of Sunlight, Issei home with her. New power couple. Written by FL as. AN. If anyone can guess the identity of this FL as. Then 1. Holy shit, how did you guess that, and 2. You will get a mention in one of my books. The picture was not much better, as it had an image of Jolina holding Issei as he looked like he was out cold, and it seemed to have been taken mid-teleportation. I think it was taken somewhere in Northern Europe by this new journalist called FL as. Quite an interesting name, don't you think? Zioticus was too focused on the prospect of getting to act like an intimidating dad again, even if it was for his son, but still a man can have dreams. Plus the future promise of grandkids, and a lot more than just those from Grafia and Surziches. Even Venelana had forgotten the whole ruining of tablecloth, as she was already imagining how to be a grandmother for dragon babies. Only really Rias, Grafia and Milikas were kinda worried about their little brother and uncle, since he didn't look so well in that picture, and they had heard about Jolina's declaration of love for Issei from the others. My, I didn't expect to see any more of my children getting married while I was still alive, ain't that funny, Rias dear? Venelana said, as she looked menacingly at Rias with her friendly smile and closed eyes, but behind it was a clear message. Where are my grandkids, Rias? Where is my new son-in-law? Since Rias had for the last 70 years denied every single request, and her mother was getting scarier and scarier for every new one she denied. As well as impatient. Rias could only shiver under her mother's menacing presence, though luckily her new knee saved her, as she began to suddenly cry. It took the two grandkids fantasizing full attention that their new one was in any kind of trouble. Oh dear, don't worry, grandmother is here, little Tia. Venelana said as she held Tia's little hand, which seemed to help, but only briefly as she began to cry again. This time Grafia took charge, this was her kid after all, and so she took Tia out of her seat, pulled up her shirt and began to breastfeed Tia, which seemed to work. There, you were just hungry, right, Tia? Grafia said, as Venelana kept trying to help. Milikas just looked away, as did his grandfather, as neither wanted their wives or fiancé after them about seeing another woman breast. Rias just sighed over the chaotically normal morning she found herself at, it just missed her two brothers' own touch of unknown added chaos, then it would have been perfect. But still, I just hope Issei is okay with that woman, who knows what she could be thinking. Rias said as she began to read more of the article, wanting to know where she could find Jolina and Issei. Present time, Denmark, Jolina house. So, you don't remember when you went up in flames, said some pretty powerful words and brought me out of my panic, I guess. Jolina asked Issei, as she placed 2 plates of food down on the table, one for Issei and her. Though she had chosen to sit opposite to him, feeling still rather guilty over the rumor she had begun, as well as the whole scene they had upstairs earlier. Yes, I don't remember much of last night after I met with you. I do remember feeling an intense pain, which I guess explains why my body feels so sore. Issei said, curious to know what happened last night. Yeah, well that is about it, since we'd have to ask Drake to tell what else happened, and since he is really lazy in the morning, that won't happen anytime soon. So for now let's eat, enjoy. Jolina said, as she picked up a piece of food Issei had never seen, but it looked so familiar to him. It was brown, and reminded him a lot of bread, but it had all sorts of grain on it. He noticed his plate had a lot of them on it too. I don't mean to sound rude, but why are we eating moldy bread? Issei asked, becoming even more confused when Jolina suddenly looked comically betrayed. What do you mean? This is not moldy bread, it's fresh from the baker. Jolina asked, her tone sounding so confused and curious as to how Issei doesn't know about this kind of bread. Issei just took another look at it, still thinking it looked wrong. Well, if you say so. But what is it then? It looks unhealthy. Issei said as he took a bite of it, noticing it had a thin layer of butter on top of it, even though he found it to be weird. But with much prayer to the dragon gods and a bit of bravery took a bite. It's not though, it's the healthiest bread in the whole world, even Germans ain't got shit with their bun wannabe bread. Jolina said confidently as she took another large bite. Issei noticed that she didn't have butter on her bread, and if she did it was hidden under a thick layer of some kind of grey mass. Issei just kept eating small bites of it, not wanting to start a whole discussion on food, as he felt Jolina would probably kill him with her facts. And for every bite he began to wonder why he had never heard of this kind of bread before. It tasted really good. So what is this kind of bread called? I would like to eat this with my family sometime in the future, they would love it I am sure. Issei said with genuine interest, he liked its taste a lot, and plus it was much healthier according to Jolina than what they were eating. Jolina just began to laugh in a low, yet frightening tone, making Issei feel shivers go up his back. She then locked eyes with him, his being slightly frightened by her sudden change in mood, while hers looked almost comically dead. Don't, you will regret it. The first time is always the best time, it only gets worse and worse for every other time. Jolina spoke, her voice sounding sure as she had eaten this kind of bread most of her life, and she was getting sick of it. It's healthy and all, but it gets stale real quick and thus loses its taste in some way, as it never tastes as well as it did the first time. Issei just decided to stay quiet and enjoy his breakfast, while also thinking over her words and funnily enough, fearing this would be the only time it would taste this good. So from the end of an slightly frightened conversation came a peaceful silence as they each enjoyed their breakfast. But even that peace was broken as the boosted gear appeared on Jolina's left arm and out of it came Drake's tired voice. Good morning you two, is what I would like to say, but I believe we all know that we need to talk about last night's incident. Drake began, the other two nodding as they had been waiting for him, as he probably remembered more than them. Yes, I would like to know what happened while I was in that state, and since Issei doesn't remember anything up till that point, you'll have to fill me and him in. Jolina said, as she put her left arm up and onto the table, so both she and Issei could see it clearly. Of course, partner. So when you suddenly became still, or whatever that state of yours is, Issei called out to me and asked for my help. I could tell that you were in a sort of fight with something inside of yourself, like something I didn't know was there, like it had been hidden behind something, or that you were trying to hide from. Bragg explained, as both he and Issei watched carefully how Jolina reacted to his statement. She surprisingly only raised an eyebrow, like she didn't understand what he meant. What do you mean? I'm hiding something inside my head? Jolina asked, in a semi-worried voice. That is what I am saying, partner, but it seems you have hid it so well that not even you remember it. So I can't find it to figure out what it is that you're hiding from yourself, but something I did figure out, which should be impossible, is that Issei is also my host. Of sorts. Drake said, as he just dropped a kind of big bombshell at the end of an already rather big mouthful. Said bombshell had by then landed, blown up and made Jolina and Issei both very confused. I am your what? Issei yelled, as he slammed his hands into the table, making a few cracks appear. He couldn't control his strength, nor did he really care as he had just been told something that should be impossible. The system had faults, yes, but it never gave sacred gears to other races than humans. That can't be right, Drake, I am a full-blooded dragon. And besides I don't have any biological parents, so how would I, the reincarnation of Issei Haidu, be able to be your host? Why did I never think about this? Issei said, as he just realized the most obvious answer to what Drake was talking about. Issei just sank down in his chair weakly as he felt defeated since once again Issei Haidu was bucking with his life. He would have blown up if not for the fact that Jolina would die and he might reveal the supernatural if he did. So instead he just let a single tear roll down his cheek as he felt a fear he hadn't felt in well over 100 years. The fear of being wanted, but only because he is another version of Issei Haidu. Not this shit again with him. Bucking Issei Haidu, you just always find a way to buck with my life. Issei growled angrily as Jolina and Drake both looked shocked at him. Drake felt impressed that he had realized or maybe even remembered that through him being a reincarnate of Issei Haidu and himself as well, he had the soul and right of being the Red Dragon Emperor. But Jolina just felt shocked because she could feel his hatred for the man that she had always heard such high praise of from both her uncle, who is a priest, her mentor Drake, and the few other supernatural beings she had met in her life. But here was one, and the only one she knew so far, that not only was surrendered by Issei Haidu's former family, friends and loved ones, but was also a reincarnate of him, and he hated it. Do you really hate being reminded of him all the time? Yes, I do. It's a never-ending curse that I am never able to step outside of his shadow, because every little thing I do gets praised, and I am told how like I am. The only thing I did that he never did was become a heavenly dragon, but even that he beat, since Lilith and her mother both think he could be a dragon god since he beat Trahixa. Issei complained as he remembered how proudly the two had spoken about him and how much he wanted to squish the mother-daughter pair for talking so highly of him. I see, it's a burden to be reminded of him all the time, for you Issei. But it's a truth you'll have to accept, so don't let it get you down. Because even though you say you hate him, I believe somewhere inside of you also admire him. That is one thing all dragons do, we admire those who are strong, be they a dragon or another species. Drake explained, his voice giving a bit of comfort to Issei, something he was grateful for. Even more that the ancient dragon wouldn't take his words too deeply, since he didn't seem offended by his rude words of his arguably best host, and instead thought about how he had been affected by these unjust exception other people had placed on him just because he was a reincarnate of him. Let's discuss this part later, when you're ready for it, Issei. Drake said, earning a nod from Issei. So yes, Jolina Issei is technically your twin red dragon emperor, but he can't use the power of the boosted gear, since the system placed me into a new soul, as soon as I believed my soul and Issei's had been severed, but it seems it didn't. But even though he can't use my power, he can still enter the dreamscape, and he can even interfere with the boosted gear, which led to him doing something I have never seen before. Drake explained, his last few words sounding more impressive than the others as what Drake saw last night was indeed something he had never seen before and was intrigued by it. Both Issei and Jolina looked curiously at the crimson-red gauntlet as the green gem glowed in different ways as Drake's words sounded very intriguing. Mostly to Issei, as he wanted to hear what it was he did that made the ancient dragon sound so impressed. It seems that you obtained a new principal power last night and I have to say it was not what I had expected it to be. I had believed that every dragon who managed to obtain their principle would gain powers which were just pure destroying, but you Issei have obtained something different than any power I have ever seen. It's not pure destruction, it's more of guiding light, if you get what I mean. Drake said, earning two different reactions. One was Jolina becoming confused as she didn't know what Drake was talking about when spoke about principles and principal powers. And Issei just sounded disappointed since he had hoped it was going to be cool or something like that, since even though he is old physically, he is still rather immature. What's a principle? Does it have something to do with that speech you give me every time I lose focus or don't want to train Drake? Jolina asked, confused, not understanding how important this whole thing was. Though before Drake could say anything, Issei spoke up first. It's a sort of power that a dragon has all for themselves. Many, if not all of the famous dragons have one, I have one too. It's what gives us our power, makes us be able to rise above our peers, and for some to see us as leaders of our kind. Take Drake for example, he and his rival Albion both have a principle, it's used when people address them. Issei explained as he with a snap of his fingers summoned a small sun in Jolina's kitchen. Jolina just looked at it for a bit, trying to understand what principles and names had to do with one another until she noticed a small ray of sunlight hitting Issei's face from the left. His face, even though it still had a few burn marks on it, looked handsome in the morning sunlight as his hair looked almost like a smooth gold surface in its light and his eyes glowing a cozy warm light at her. Then she got it, his connection with names and principles. Your principle is sunlight, right? That's why you feel warm to be near and why your aura resembles a sun. It's also why you look the way you do, right? Jolina asked, making Issei smirk before he nodded his head. Yep, that's kin to how our principles work, though mine is probably the lamest sounding. I wish mine also had a cool name like some dragons have, like Drake has the principle of domination and whatever Albion had again. Look, the point is our principles are our main and real power, and depending on which kind you have and what kind of person you are, that power grows and changes. Which is also why I was very happy to hear that my principle had grown, though I don't know if I should be so happy, since it sounds like I developed a rather useless power. Issei said, as he sat back down in his chair, still feeling a bit bummed out about his new power, but also wondering if he could train it to be more useful. Oh, I see. Sounds neat, but also kind of like the Devil Pillar's family powers, you know. Jolina suggested, with a friendly smile, and she didn't mean it as a bad thing, but both Drake and Issei couldn't help but narrow their eyes at her, even if Drake couldn't really do that. What? Jolina asked, not sure of what she had done wrong. Drake just sighed, knowing his host was not the best at reading the room. Our powers aren't like the ones of the devils, they are many times weaker than our own. Plus they never train to make themselves stronger, so even if they have a powerful ability, it wouldn't do much against us. Drake explained, making Jolina nod, but not before she asked another question. But don't dragons also get more powerful as time goes by? She asked, though this time she got her answer from the two dragons, as they both at the same time sighed, as neither of them wanted to continue this discussion. Right, sorry, I just got really interested in how your powers work. Jolina said, as she smiled apologetically. It's fine, I'll tell you whatever you want to know later, but for now. Drake, can you please continue? Issei asked as he ignored Jolina's smile of excitement from his promise to teach her about his race, seeing it as a date. Yes, of course, where was I? Oh, right. Yes, well after I explained to you that you were also my host, you began to think about something, and then you said you had an idea to get Jolina's negative emotion away. Then you began to transform into a more dragonic form, though your normal crimson scales were covered in crimson flames, even your eyes and hair changed color. You went up in crimson flames, your entire body was covered in it, but you didn't seem to mind. Drake explained in a serious tone, as he remembered how almost angelic he looked in that form, as it reminded him a lot of how he first met God. Jolina was brought out of her daydreaming, as she seemed to remember a small glimpse of this image of Issei that Drake was trying to explain. I think I remember it too. You look so powerful, even though I could barely see or hear, I could just feel your power. You look a lot like an angel of crimson fire. Jolina said as she tried to remember more of what she saw, something Drake joined in on to see if he could maybe find something in head, so none of them noticed how Issei was just sitting there completely still. He had only heard a few people saying that about a dragon in its half-human and dragon state, and the person those people were talking about was his mother. He had heard how she had threatened to take him away, how she had become like a dragonic angel and was covered in blue flames. He let a small tear slip out, feeling a sort of deeper connection to his mother through this image people have had of both of them as dragonic angels of fire. Mother, I really do take after you, don't I? Issei thought as he closed his eyes, smiling a bit at the thought. Though he was brought out of it as Jolina was calling out to him. Issei. Issei, you there? Issei opened his eyes, his tear stain not noticeable, thankfully. Yeah, what is it? Issei answered, putting his focus back on the main discussion. Well you see Issei, you might not know this or have maybe not realized it yet, but it seems that you have made a few copies of Jolina's memories. Drake said, Jolina nodding with him in agreement. Issei just widened his eyes in confusion until he began to feel a really annoying sense of deja vu. You mean to say that I have some of her memories in my head? Then how come I don't remember any of them? Issei asked as he began to silently pray to both Office, Great Red and Lilith that his possible second worst day in his life wasn't about to repeat itself. Well, I think, and this is only my theory, that they're not really inside of you, not right now at least. They're inside that form you used when you used it to take away her negative emotions. You also seemed to take copies of certain memories that I didn't know about and some I did. Drake said as both Issei and Jolina began to stare at each other, both confused as to how his power could copy Jolina's memories. Jolina was a bit happy though, because even though this whole thing was happening because she has some sort of problem in head, it still let her have an excuse to be with Issei. Issei felt a bit frightened at the thought of having to do something like this again, as last time it didn't go so well. It almost ended with him killing his future family, as well as himself. But he also felt that he had to, since he wanted to help Jolina with this problem, and he wouldn't be okay with himself if he just left when she needed him. He was a key player in this mess, and he had to play his part. But this also leads to a new question. What kind of memories has Jolina been hiding from herself, and can we find them if Issei learns how to use this new power of his? Drake explained, bringing back the two others' attention onto the Crimson Gauntlet. Issei looked curiously at the Crimson Gauntlet. You want me to use this new power that I can't fully control nor use yet to find memories that you two have never known were inside of Jolina? Issei asked as he turned his eyes from the Crimson Gauntlet to Jolina instead as she sat there a bit quietly. She looked a bit worried that Issei might not help her since she had spread lies about him, embarrass him and attack his family, even if she didn't do the last part intentionally. Yes, that is what I am saying. You're her only hope to figure out what this weird state she goes into is and maybe even how to stop it from happening. I ask you, as maybe only a mere soul of a former heavenly dragon, would you offer me your power and support to help my host, Jolina Gladius? Drake asked, his tone was serious. He didn't care if he had to put his pride to the side. Issei was taken aback by his request, since it takes a lot of desperation for most dragons to ask for help, even if they are sealed away in a sacred gear. Not that his request mattered much to Issei, as he had already decided that he would help, since he couldn't deny that he and Jolina were now connected. He was sure that if he did leave, then one day all of those memories would unlock themselves, and he would see all sorts of things that he probably wouldn't be ready for. I will help if you in turn help me with training this new power of mine. Issei said as he reached his right hand over the table. Jolina looked at his hand for a bit before reaching over and grabbed it, smiling as he seemed to overlook her faults to help her. He wanted to help her because he could train his new ability, but also because he felt bad for her, that she was obviously in some damaged inner state. But he also wanted to follow the promise he made to his mother last night at her grave. To try and understand what it is he feels for Jolina and find out if he really cares about her or not. Thank you Issei. Thank you for doing this. Jolina said, blushing a bit as she shook his hand, and even more when Issei sent her a bit of a nervous but friendly smile. "It's fine, who wouldn't help when someone's in need?" he said, as continued to smile a bit nervously. Jolina smiled brightly at his words, happy that he wouldn't leave her when he could and was probably the only person who could help her. "So this leads to another matter we need to discuss," Drake said a bit seriously, though something about his tone made Issei feel a sort of deja vu, but he didn't know why until Drake began speaking again. "If we'll be doing this, you two will have to live together so that I can train you and so you can help next time Jolina enters that state," Drake said. Both Issei and Jolina just went quiet as they looked at the red gauntlet. It was an awkward silence that could have very well been the sign of the end of all sound. But luckily for the world, Jolina began to giggle a bit before she suddenly jumped up and began dancing around. "I get to live with Issei, I get to live with Issei," she continued, while Issei began to dread his near future. Because if every day was going to start like this one did, then he would be killed by his own embarrassment before his older sister Grafia could. But is it that bad? To live with her for a bit? She is only a human, this whole could be over in a blink of an eye for us. Issei's thought said, though he wasn't too sure what thoughts it was that was trying to make him agree with this. But luckily before Jolina could accidentally break something in her home by dancing around, or Issei could begin to question what has led to his current position in life, a red communication circle appears in front of Issei. It had the emblem of Gremory on it, not to mention it was the same circle Issei had used before having to design his own for his whole being a heavenly dragon thing. The circle glowed a bit and before the glow died out, Jolina sat down in her chair again. Rias appeared from it in a miniature version of herself. "Rias, dear sister, what do I, where the hell are you and is that girl with you?" Rias yelled, surprising both the Drake and his host that Rias would yell at her own brother as the first thing when she contacted him. "I am fine, Rias, and yes miss. Jolina is with me. I am in her house at the moment," Issei answered before sighing a bit at his sister's protectiveness, as she called it. "Good, at least you seem safe. Wait, are those burn marks? What the hell happened? I am fine, I did this myself somehow. Which also leads to me having to ask you something, dear sister." Issei interrupted her before she could yell at him again and then maybe declare war on Jolina for hurting him, though she wouldn't be able to ever. "If you say so, I will ask more about this later when you come home." "So, what did you wish to ask of me?" Rias asked, now seeming less angry and more intrigued to what he could want to ask, hoping secretly it was punishment for Jolina. "Well, sister, you see. Last night I met Jolina out on a beach. And something unexpected happened, so now I might need to live together with Jolina for some time," Issei said before quickly closing his eyes, hoping that his sister wouldn't kill him or Jolina for that matter. After a while Issei opened his eyes a bit, hoping Rias had just stopped the call, but no, instead she just stood there. She was completely still, but then he noticed it. She was blushing madly as her eyes were shaking. Imagine what this unexpected thing could have been. She then shakingly pointed her finger towards him. Pervert, she screamed as Issei just sighed as this was a much better outcome than what he had feared, only to realize this made it a death sentence in disguise. No, it isn't like that, Rias. You tell her, Jolina, tell her I didn't do anything perverted," Issei begged as both he and Rias turned towards Jolina, who just looked at the two for a bit. Then in a single second, she seemed to blush a bit before she began to speak. "It's true, he didn't do anything pervert. He helped me when I needed it," Jolina explained, making both Rias and Issei sigh in relief, though neither noticed the little mischievous smirk that formed on Jolina's face. "He even slept with me. In the nude. I did it only to heal him, but it was hard to sleep when he moved so much. But I managed," she said, watching as each of the two siblings began to blush. Then Rias turned towards Issei slowly, making him freeze just by her glare. "Come home, now," Rias said in an eerily calm tone, though her eyes just screamed bloody murder. Issei is only scared of three things in his life, the second being his stepmother and the third being his sisters. He knew that he was going to die when he stepped through the gates to the Gremory mansion. "Yes. Rias," Issei said in defeat as he hung his head low as he had already accepted his fate. Small time skip, underworld, Gremory mansion. Outside the large mansion that Rias and her family called home was almost an even bigger garden. It was filled to the brim with roses since they were the main motif of the Gremorys, but it also housed a minor manor in it. This manor had a rather open design to it as it would remind most reincarnated devils and even some of the much older ones of the Hanging Gardens with its design and open-air structure. It had a squad-roofed walkway around it which was continued again on the next floor and the last one too, much like the Hanging Gardens. It had red roof tiles, while its pillars were white and its floors were a mix of blue and red tiles. The front door was also very neatly designed, as not only was it made from a wood that can only be found in the familiar forest, it was only masterfully carved so that the two double doors each had a dragon that was holding the door knobs. Though the dragons didn't look like each other, as the other was much thinner and longer, while the other was a bit bigger and looked older. It was designed with the image of its two original inhabitants, not that they both liked it. It even had a bed on the top floor, in the open air, a choice the legal owner of the manor never quite understood. And under said bed was a rather huge yin and yang-like art of floor tiles. Instead of two balls flying around each other, it was two dragons, one red and one blue flying around each other. Though since no one had been there for a while, the manor was rather empty, except for the daily cleaning from staff. But not for long, as was evident since the maids and butlers had done their utmost to clean the place, since they had gotten news that its master was coming home, and he was not alone. So as the majority of the Gremory family stood outside the manor waiting, the fast steps, few shouts and various cleaning noises could be heard, as the staff in service to the Gremorys are very loyal and care a lot for their masters. Some, mostly the women, care a lot about the young lords, Mylicus and Issei, since they had known them from young ages. They had a special place in their hearts, since what woman wouldn't in their right mind, wouldn't feel charmed by a sweet young boy's innocent smile. Rias, Mylicus, Grafia, Tia, Venelana and Zeoticus all stood and were waiting for Issei to arrive with Jolina. Serzichus had wanted to come, but one stern look from Grafia and he was back in his office doing paperwork, hopefully. The feelings about Issei's arrival were a bit mixed, since the two older Gremorys were happy that the son they adopted, whom they see as their own, was getting himself new friends and maybe even a girlfriend. They hoped for the latter mostly. While the younger, except Tia and Mylicus, were both wondering what to do since Issei seemed to have been damaged, but how? And did Jolina have something to do with it? While the youngest were both just in a kind of gray zone, since Tia didn't know who Issei was and also couldn't really stand in the situation since she was literally only born 2 months ago. And Mylicus was happy to see his uncle again, but he was also worried about him as he knew his uncle was strong, really strong, and only his dad could hurt him, but even then his dad had to try very hard. They were all made aware of a sudden teleportation circle that formed itself in front of them. It was Issei's, since it had a dragon on it and from its mouth a sun was shining. He had gotten a lot of shit from sun gods and other sun beings about his design, some thinking it was too barbaric and others just thinking he wasn't worthy to have it on his circle. They all watched with bated anticipation as Issei and Jolina appeared before them. They felt a bit worried as they saw how many burn marks Issei had on him, though they all became a bit relieved as they noticed that he didn't seem to be in pain, as none of the marks had hurt him that much. They also saw that the young woman, Jolina Gladius, that he had taken home with him, for reasons they, except Rias, hadn't been told yet, was clinging onto Issei's right arm. She was smiling a bit nervously, as she was a bit scared of meeting most members of Issei's family. So when she felt their eyes on her, it made her cling tighter to Issei's arm, making him blush as he felt her chest pressed against him. An awkward silence ensued a bit after, as both sides just looked at the other nervously. Issei and Jolina were a bit nervous, as neither of them knew how Issei's family, besides Rias, was going to react to him and her having to live together for reasons they couldn't really explain. And Issei's family were in a similar state as they wondered why she was here. They had a theory that it might have to do with that article they all shared back at breakfast. Except Rias, as she was wondering how her parents, nephew and sister-in-law were going to react when they learned Issei and Jolina had to live together. With a bated and nervous breath, Jolina let go of Issei's arm, making him and the others look at her, all wondering what she was going to do or say. She then closed her eyes as she put her right hand over her heart, calming it down as she felt it was racing with nervousness. She then exhaled, opened her eyes with a slightly more calm glint in them, and made direct eye contact with Issei's adoptive mother, Venelin, who felt a bit surprised at the sudden eye contact. "I am Jolina Gladius, this generation's Red Dragon Emprese. It's an honor to meet the mother, as well as the father of Issei. I hope you will allow me to stay with him for the foreseeable future," Jolina announced, with almost no fault cracks or sudden stops. She even bowed deeply to show respect to them. They were both rather surprised by her introduction, as neither had expected her to go this far. So when the surprise began to fade and they began to process her words, their slightly awkward expressions changed as they both just looked. Are they smiling? Issei thought as he, his two sisters and nephew all watched as the oldest family members there were both smiling with joy as Jolina's words had made them happy. They both looked at each other as their smiles turned to smirks, and they both with only a simple nod had made an unspoken deal and turned their heads back towards Jolina, who still had her head lowered in a deep and respectful bow. It was also to hide her slight blush. The two of them walked closer to her, making their children and grandson look at them carefully, all of them wondering what they were going to do. Issei felt something inside of him telling him to stand by Jolina's side, though he hesitated a bit but still walked closer. But only a bit as his mother began to speak. "What a lovely name you have, Jolina. Then Alana said, as she reached out her right hand to touch Jolina's right cheek, lifting her head up slowly. Her eyes made contact with Venelana's, which held this soothing and friendly feeling to them, which made her blush a bit more, as she hadn't expected she'd get this far. "Me and my husband would be overjoyed to have you stay here with our son for as long as you like," Venelana said, as she gently stroked her cheek slowly, inspecting her almost. Issei couldn't see this, as he stood to the left side of Jolina, but he could see his mother had that look in her eyes, the one she only had when you have my blessing, as well as my husband's to stay with us and with my son. "If you are a friend of Issei's, then you are also family, dear," Venelana said, as both Issei and his other family members, except his father, all felt it was too late. Venelana had this thing where she, despite being a really good mother, can also be rather narrow-minded and chose to sometimes pick out small details and see them as something more than what they are and not explain to the victim what she means. Her husband and her had done the same to Issei Haidu, which led to all sorts of problems down the line. But Jolina just began to beam with happiness as she had not understood Venelana's subtle hints and just took it at face value. Something that made the most of the devils, who were gathered at the time, have a feeling of deja vu of when Venelana and Xiaticus did the same to Issei Haidu. "Thank you so much. Mother. Oh, sorry. Is it okay if I call you that, ma'am?" Jolina said without thinking, before blushing a lot, feeling embarrassed at her words, and tried to apologize. But she didn't get to, as Venelana just hugged her into her giant chest and warm arms, as she felt happy to have a new child, and better yet a possible future daughter-in-law. "It's okay, my dear, you can call me whatever you want. You can call me your mother if you want to. Jolina, are you okay?" Venelana happiness and joy seemed to vanish as worry took its place. Xiaticus noticed it too, as he felt a strange feeling coming from Jolina. Issei knew this feeling, but it was a bit different from the times before. It didn't appear because of him, it came out because of something his mother had said. "Jolina, mother, get away from her, give her to me. Jolina, can you hear me?" Issei sprang into action, not wasting a single second to think too deeply about the slightly different feeling she was giving off. Venelana let go of her, as her worry only grew even more as Issei seemed to take this much more seriously than he normally took things. It made her worried as to what this strange feeling was and why it suddenly appeared. Issei grabbed onto Jolina, clutching her into his chest as he held her hand, checking for a pulse. He had seen her do this like 3 times now, but the times before she always lashed out, either by attacking as she did the first time, or by sending out waves of negative emotions like last night. But this time it seemed like she went into no living state, but luckily she still had a pulse, but it was weak. Very weak. Is this another version of her stillness? Maybe a more self-harming one. I mean, she isn't lashing out this time, she is only sending out this cold feeling. But why? Issei wondered as he continued to scan her body for any signs of retaliation, disease, wounds or something else that may be harmful to her and the others here. Instead he felt her hand grasp on his with little to almost no strength. It made him feel a bit more calm as she seemed to still be conscious or at least still somewhat in control. "Jolina, can you hear me? Can you talk, move or maybe remember something?" Issei asked, confusing the others as to why she would be able to remember something, but Issei didn't care about that for the time being. He watched carefully as Jolina tried to word, with this sudden little to almost no strength she had, something to him. Maybe even a clue. He watched carefully as he tried to think what the words might mean. He translated them to "Use the guiding light, Issei." Issei felt nervous as her soundless words seeped in. He knew it might be the best way to help, but he didn't know how to control it, not yet at least. I'll try, Jolina. But I don't if I can't." She spoke a few more soundless words, which he didn't feel a need to translate as he could just feel what they meant. "I believe you can." He nodded, his nerves lowering a bit. He then took a second to calm himself before beginning to try and summon this power. His family watched him in awe as his aura, magic and power began to flow around him and formed a sort of circle around him. His wings and tail popped out, but unlike last time there was no fire, at least no crimson flames, as only his hair and eyes went up in golden flames. Issei, the heavenly dragon of sunlight. The one who achieved what only gods could. The one who took the sun's light and put it in his eyes before making it his own light, shall offer you, Jolina Gladius said, light and guide you to a better tomorrow. He felt the words just flow right out of his mouth as he almost on instinct held his now clawed hand much tighter around her own hand as he felt the same feeling he felt last time. The pain, the memories and this weird feeling of deep-rooted despair. The pain was nowhere near the level it was at the last time, but it was still enough for him to growl and roar out in pain. Ah. He roared in pain, but he began to feel the pain fade and Jolina began to tighten her grasp on his hand. His flames began to fade as well, and then his wings and tail popped back in again. Jolina reached a hand up to his face as she lay on his legs with his head being right over her own. She could feel he was burning hot but still proceeded to reach forward as Issei kept breathing rapidly as he felt a bit of lingering pain as well as a sudden fadgeture. But his attention was taken away from his pain and lack of energy as he felt Jolina's soft hand on his cheek. Jolina. Oh good, you made me a bit scared there. Well it seems we managed to I love you Issei. Her fourth declaration of love for him stopped him dead in his tracks as he just froze before slowly looking down at her. He made eye contact with her and he found himself dumbfounded with how beautiful her eyes were. He had never ever, or only just realized it now, but her eyes were so beautiful, like two far-off stars of a far-off different place. It wasn't the same like when she flirted with him or fell into her colder still state. No, it was like a pure and loving feeling they gave him. He had seen many things in his 100 years of living, but he had never seen anything like this. The only thing that could match this was when he met desire. Follow my desires. Issei mumbled as he just stared into her eyes, like they were a gate between him and the dream or the infinite. Jolina became a bit confused by his words, then she became a bit worried when he began to pull her towards his face. She closed her eyes, blushing madly as she was trying to accept this sudden change in Issei's feelings for her. Then Alana and Ziotica stood completely still as they watched the two's lips meet. The other four also joined them and fell into a similar state as they saw Issei and Jolina kissing on the ground, with Issei holding her up in his arms. The kiss felt almost eternal to everyone present and when it ended Jolina was blushing madly as the first kiss Issei gave her was just too much for her. She could only stare at him with so many emotions as she wanted more but at the same time felt she shouldn't push her luck. Issei opened his eyes slowly, making eye contact between them again. He smiled at her for a bit before he slowly began to realize what he had done. He was almost about to push her off when he remembered she would probably be really weak right now and so he shouldn't push her off right now even if he was embarrassed. Plus who could know what it might make her feel and as she had just been in one still state today, he was not risking anything to make her go into such a state again, even if his pride and embarrassment was the price to pay. So instead he opted to just become as red as his sibling's hair and hide behind his still clawed hands. Oh for the infinite dream, gods why did I do that? He wondered, but his embarrassment was rather short-lived as he began to hear someone giggling. He spread his clawed fingers a bit and saw it was Jolina giggling, finding his kind of childish actions adorable and cute and it made her giggle in a pitch that Issei himself found cute. It sounded much like a young girl's giggle but he was pretty sure Jolina was a lot older than she both looked and sounded. It made him curious to learn her age but that was a whole other set of problems he would deal with later as for now he had to deal with his family questions as well as worry. And true enough his parents were not in the slightest happy looking, they were smothered in worry and slight fear of what this girl Issei had brought home could do if Issei wasn't around to stop her. Hey Jolina, can you stand? Issei asked as he took his hands off his face and looked worriedly at his family, hoping they wouldn't do something unnecessary. Yeah. But why, I quit like this seat just, please stand up okay? I let you. Never mind, just stand up okay? Issei blushed a bit, almost giving her an offer she wouldn't have denied, but something that would ruin any of his chances of ever feeling like the almighty dragon of sunlight. Jolina nodded, a bit sadly, and with some help from Issei, she stood up again, but held on to his side as she now saw the stare she was getting from the others. It was only Rias, much to their fortune, who seemed to not have become as worried as the others and seemed slightly neutral in the matter. But she would step in if things became too much. Let me explain, mother, father, sisters, Milikas. As we mentioned earlier, me and Jolina have to live together as Jolina has these kinds of outbursts of sorts and I am the only one that we know of who can stop it and bring her back from this. Issei looked carefully at his parents as he tried to lock eyes with them and hopefully make them agree to this, even though it could be risky. His parents looked at each other yet still kept an eye on the two of them. They got a similar stare from Grafia, who held onto her daughter tightly and stood only a meter away from Milikas. Rias seemed a bit on edge since she wanted to help mediate this whole thing, but felt it was best that she let Issei and Jolina do that since her parents would probably just say she should stay out of it since she was rather biased on her brother's behalf a lot of the time. Issei kept watching his parents intently as he slowly tightened his, still clawed, left hand around Jolina's right arm in worry and as a way to show her and the others he would protect her. Jolina didn't really look much at the others, fearing they would deny Issei's request the moment she did, but even more so because her head was being stirred around by the single image, the single thought, and maybe even just that little wet dream that she had in her mind for years now. What if we had been alone right now? What would have happened between me and Issei? Would he have kissed me more, would he have loved me and made love to me? She felt dirty thinking about it, since this was neither the place or the time to be thinking such things, but she just couldn't help but think what if. So while most of the people here were all on edge, at least more than the Red Dragon Emprese, she hid behind Issei's shoulder and only left half of her body exposed. Issei was still watching carefully, even sometimes having to glare at his older sister Grafia with a kind of warning glare to not take a single step closer as she had tried to walk a few steps closer a few times now. Finally, the older couple turned back fully to Issei and Jolina, making Grafia step back a bit to stay near her son, who was worried about what his grandparents were going to say. Vanillana stepped forward a bit, earning herself a worried glance from her husband before she began speaking. No, we are sorry for our sudden rejection of you, Jolina, and I am sorry if what I said caused you to go into this stillness state. You are both welcome to stay here in the Gremory territory, but me and my husband would like you both to stay here at Dragon's Pyramid and not venture outside of the Gremory Gardens, is that understood, Issei? Vanillana asked, her voice being more stern than before, yet still held that bit of overbearing niceness and charm that many people couldn't help but love. Yes, mother, and thank you, to both of you. I am very grateful that you allow us to stay at your home, when nonsense, my boy, this is your home too, and this is you and your mother's house. If we kicked you out for something as small as this, I am sure Tiamat would come back from the grave and not a good time. Zeoticus asked, as he earned himself an angry glare from both his wife and his daughter-in-law. Though Issei seemed rather neutral, at least on the outside, since he didn't want to blow up in front of his family, and surprisingly enough not in front of Jolina. It's fine, father, just don't let it happen again, got it? Issei said, sending a few chills through Zeoticus, who just nodded at the very clear threat, though Issei seemed to regain a bit of his composure and put his right hand on his mouth, feeling bad about what he said or at least hinted at. So while the two of the four males of the Gremory family were having an awkward moment with each other and having two of the most ruthless women as a part of said moment with them, Jolina stood on the sideline, still with her right arm in Issei's clutches. She was confused a bit as to why this had all gone so well, even after Issei's parents finding out about this whole problem she was having, which would not be good for her or those around her, since it could maybe one day lead to her using the Juggernaut drive. So how could all these people be, even if they did say they couldn't be near other people and had to stay in Issei's house only, still be so nice to her and even apologize? It confused her how they all just seemed to accept it and move on with it. She didn't hate it, she liked it. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.